All right, testing, 1, 2, 3. Let me know in the chat if you can hear me. We are going to kick this off. All right, 3, 2, 1. Let's go. All right. Whoops. Camera's a little high there. Let me set that up like that. There we go. This seems good enough. How about that? All right. Welcome to Automate All the Things live stream number 13. I'm surprised we're at number 13 here. It's been a little while. So yeah, really excited to welcome you all. We are going to do all button the whole session. So we're only going to be talking about the button field. Let's look at our little play-by-play today. So just going to talk a little bit about what the button field is, why I think it's one of the cooler things, new fields in Airtable, and then we're going to talk or introduce 5 different ways that you can use it, and some inspiration by Marius. Good to see you. Hey, Colleen. Hey, Joe from FinSuite. I imagine it's Joe. Let me know who's here. So really excited to dive into 5 different ways that you can use the button field. Let's kick this off. All right. So quick introduction. What is the button field? So essentially it's a button, right? But that button can do multiple things. So if I just and I'll introduce this base in just a moment, but essentially I can customize field type, and every button field has a few configurations. You can give it, the name, what does that button do, a style, and then action. And this is where we're going to spend most of our time kind of exploring all of these options. So I won't go through them, but essentially, button initially was just a URL. And that is actually very powerful, because just opening a URL can do many things. It can trigger a webhook. It can show a specific search in a website, and those are the 2 first kind of things that we're going to do. But then there's this integration between the button field and a bunch of blocks. So blocks are mini applications that live on top of Airtable that are then organized in dashboards. So this right here is a description block that I use for kind of our checklist for today, and there are blocks to send emails. And so button field allows you to go into one of those blocks and, most importantly, provide context into what record are you clicking that button for, right? So if you're sending an email to SendGrid, if you click a button for a specific record, it's going to usually take the email that is in that record, the recipient, and the information. So we're actually going to use that to send reminder emails. Here in Page Designer, we're going to use that to create a receipt for a specific transaction, right? So the button field, what it does is it provides context for the record you're clicking on to whatever system you're speaking to, whether that's internal Airtable blocks or to a URL in the case of webhooks, or to a URL in the case of the web. So that was a very theoretical introduction into the button field. Let me know if that makes sense. And if the theory didn't speak to you, hopefully the practice will. Okay, so as I mentioned, our first use case, relatively simple, is just going to be opening a URL. So Marius, CEO of ShareGrid, and I think in the chat as well, we were discussing this idea of there are a lot of folks who use Airtable to organize their shoots, whether that's scenes or just managing upcoming shoots or whatever it is. And that is a very popular use case in Airtable. And Marius kind of thought of, well, what if we can provide a template for folks trying to organize their work in Airtable for a specific shoot, need some specific equipment, and are able to find it on ShareGrid really easily. So ShareGrid is a place where you can rent shooting equipment. Hopefully, Marius, I'm summarizing your company well. But if we go to ShareGrid, and let's say I do a search, so you can see I've already searched in San Francisco. It puts me here, and let's say I want to search for a Canon EOS C200. I have no idea what that is, and I put dates, say July 23rd to the 30th. If you could see in this URL, I'm actually just going to paste it into the chat so you can give it a look as well. There is a from date and a to date, and there's also kind of this specific model. And that information is usually already contained in the base that you're working out of. So let's say you're saying, okay, we're going to shoot starting from this date to that date, and we need this specific camera type for that shoot. Well, all we need to do is structure that URL in a way that we can click search ShareGrid directly from Airtable. So let's go ahead and use the button field to do that. So I'm going to go search in ShareGrid. It's going to be a button, and it's going to search in ShareGrid like that. Open URL, and let's just paste that URL, right? So this is the URL formula that I want. And so essentially what I'm going to go ahead and do is take every variable, right? Every part of that URL that is in my Airtable and just simply replace it with, if I zoom in, does that better? Does that see better? There you go. Replace it with my fields in Airtable. So from date, I'm just going to put little, apostrophes to say there's a string, and then I'm going to input my start date. That's like that. And then Q is my search criteria in ShareGrid, apologies, like that. I'm putting little brackets, and I'm saying mine is going to be my camera type. That is what I want to search. And my to date, again, little curly brackets, and end date, like that. Let's save that. Hopefully that works. Okay. So now, if I search this and it works properly, which it might not, it should give me a search that is looking for a Canon EOS C200 between the 15th and the 22nd. Okay. July 15th, camera EOS C200, between the 15th and the 22nd. Right. So essentially, if I structure my my base or my table in a way that replicates that search bar, I'm able to contextualize that search automatically from my base. Now, a lot of websites work like this. You can think of Airbnb. You can think of other websites that structure their URL and have URL parameters that then change for that specific search. So that was use case number one. Let me know if that inspires some ideas, some thoughts. Hopefully, Marius, that inspired you a little bit to think of, how you could help folks structure their work in Airtable for your specific brand. Okay. Whew, that was a mouthful. That was a lot of information over the last 10 minutes. Cool. Okay. Let's talk about webhooks. So second use of button field, and we explored this a little bit last week when we talked about inventory management with the barcode scanner. But there was a great question from Joe around what is the difference between using webhooks and using new record in view, and that's where I want to start this explanation of webhooks. So just a little recap of last week, and I made some changes to this base if you were here last week. So essentially, last week what we did was, this ability to add an item to a specific sales order, right? The difference last week was that we had one record for each of our sales orders. So we just said, okay, we just sold this item, and it would create a new record in our sales order to say that we've sold that item. Now, we would do that with webhooks, right? How we do that with webhooks, just a little, just talking a little bit about webhooks. Essentially, webhooks is a URL that is provided by Zapier, well, in this case of webhooks, that you can just send information to, right? So when we click this button, what we're saying to Zapier is, okay, we've just sold this product ID, right? And what we would do then in the old case is that we would then create a record here that says we've sold that item. And I kind of over the week, made it a little more complicated where I wanted to add multiple items to an open receipt. So imagine you're at a farmer's market and you're selling things, you scan the item that you're selling and you open a receipt, and then you want to close that receipt so that you could sell multiple items on the same order. So essentially how I've done that is with two different webhooks. So first there's a webhook that opens up a receipt sets that receipt to current receipt. I'm realizing as I'm explaining this, there might be a little bit of a complicated use case for explaining webhooks. So let me go into Zapier and just talk through what happens. So I have open sales receipt. It catches a webhook. So let me just talk through. It says, okay, go to this webhook and send the product ID. So let me close. Let's say this one is done. And let me open a sales receipt with this product. So whenever you sell that first product, you open the sales receipt. Let's say we're selling, product number 15, open sales order that goes to Zapier, and it creates an open receipt with only that one item. Now that we have an open receipt, right, we can just add different items to that receipt. So explaining this again, what Zapier does is that when you open a new receipt, it gets the product ID via webhooks. So that's the context I was talking to you about with that specific click of the button. When I click that button, it gives context to Zapier as to what item was sold. It was product ID, 1018. And then it goes and creates a record in our sales order with that, that item. And it just says that that's the current receipt. So it says, it creates that new record with current receipt. So we know that's the current receipt that's open. Does that make sense? Thanks, Amit, for the kind words. I appreciate that. Let me know if that explanation of webhooks makes sense. And we're going to talk a little bit about adding an item. So essentially, now that I have an open receipt, every time I click on add item, I wanted to find that open receipt and add that specific item into that open receipt. Now, what's great is that I know that I only have this one current receipt, right? So if I go ahead and set up my Zap to search for that open sales receipt and just add in, oops, that's the wrong one, and add in that new item, right? So we catch a hook. That hook, let's just test this one. We're adding item number 9 to our receipt. So this should catch that hook. Let's go ahead and see that. 14 catches the hook. It finds in Airtable, searches the current receipt. So it finds the record that has that current receipt, that open receipt, and then it updates that record with the new query string. So it says, go ahead and add in this new item. So it puts in what existed, add in that new query string, that new product ID into our receipt. So if we come into sales order, I now have 2 items in my open receipt. So that was 2 ways of using webhooks to do 2 things. First, I should close this. This has been a while. Sorry about that. Open a receipt. So whenever I open a receipt with an item, it sends that item in and then goes ahead and adds in new items whenever I click on add item. Now there was a great question from last week from Joe, I think, was what is the difference between a button and, let's say, a trigger that says new record in view. So I could have, instead of using the button field, used a check mark to say that that item was sold, and then that would go to Zapier and add that item into my open receipt. Now the challenge with that is that Zapier only triggers once on a record that's in a view. So if I sell them multiple items, not only in one receipt, but in multiple receipts or in multiple sales, I can only trigger it once per item. And the second thing, and this is more of a personal thing, is that this explicitly tells me what's going on. So I'm adding this item to the open receipt. I am opening a sales order. I shouldn't have clicked that, but it's going to open a second receipt here. Let's delete this. To that current, it's opening a receipt. And so I like that context around, that button does what it says exactly on the description. And so I'm personally more a fan of using the button field with webhooks than I am of new record in view that is triggered on a check mark per se. So we've done two things. We've now added multiple items to a open receipt, right? So I have this 2 items 15009 that I've added to this open receipt. And now the next thing I want to do is, okay, well, let's create a receipt with all of these items. So there's a reason I went through that trouble of creating these webhooks, is that our next step. Great question from Marius. Does it open another tab? And the answer is yes. That is because it's a URL. And so Airtable, if it's a URL in Airtable, or in the same base. So if you're clicking on open a view, it'll stay within the base. But if you're opening an external link, which this is, it's going to open in a new tab. So the answer is yes. And that's specifically just like when we went to ShareGrid, it's going to open in a new tab. So that was a really good question. Cool. Okay, let me know. I'm just going to take a moment here. I feel like I've shown a lot. Any questions around how I've created these receipts? I'm not sure what the lag is between us. I feel like it should be 0, but I feel like that's not true. All right, I'm going to assume that there are no questions, but feel free to drop them in the chat if there is. Okay, so we now have this receipt. So the total price, which is a roll-up of the price. So let me just go into here. A roll-up of the price. So it's a sum of the values in our basket, in our receipt. And so we have these 2 linked records. We've sold it at a farmer market. The first one is worth 40. The second one is worth 60. Total is 100. And we want to create a receipt. So we've done our webhooks. Let's talk about creating a receipt with Page Designer. So if you're unfamiliar with Page Designer, let me actually I'll start this from scratch. Let's go ahead and add in Page Designer. So Page Designer is the ability to add information from a record onto a page. So there's multiple use cases for Page Designer. Page Designer could be, creating decks. You can use, seen Page Designer to use meeting notes. So say you have a list of projects and you just want to put your notes on a page to guide a meeting. Really infinite use cases for Page Designer. But what we're going to do today is set up Page Designer to create receipts. So if I go into sales orders, that's going to be the table. I want it to be a letter. I can have different specifications, but let's keep it as a letter. And then I could add information from my table, from each one of my records onto this page. Now, I have to warn you, I am absolutely terrible at designing on Page Designer. So you have to use your imagination as to what's possible here. So it's giving me a receipt number. So let's make that a little smaller. Let's move it up to here. Let's put font size 25. And okay. So again, I'm not going to spend too much time here. So let's call this receipt number. Content is over here. Receipt number, like that. A little smaller. Boom. And what's the important part is, the items that we sold, right? So when we think about the items that we sold, they are here. So those are the two items that we sold, 15009. So let's go back into Page Designer and let's edit the layout. And then we have our product. That's what we sold, right? Now it's showing me product ID 0001, and that's the first record, that's the first receipt we created. But what we want is a table, and we want additional information about this table. So we now add columns. Let's say we want the price. That seems important. Let's add that in. Let's say we want to add in, I don't know, style. There we go. And now if I come back here, I can move the style before like that. And now it's creating a table. And let's go, instead of looking at our main view, let's create a view that is specific to the open receipt that we currently have. So we want a grid, open current receipt. We're going to filter where our current receipt is current receipt. That should only have one record in it. And so in our Page Designer, let's go to that sales order. Let's edit the layout and let's only look at current receipt. So that gives us, that receipt that we're currently working with. And you can add receipt number, you can add a total price. Let's go ahead and do that. Total price. Let's make that a little larger. Like that. Again, I told you I'm very, very, very bad at creating a Page Designer. Total price. 25. Like that. Okay, then you could add your logo, you can add, where the company is, all that good information onto this Page Designer. I'm really embarrassed how bad I am at Page Designer. But you can add in images, background colors, all that good stuff. And essentially what this does is that if we add a button that goes to this Page Designer. So let me come back here, main view. Now that we've set up our Page Designer, we can add a button that says, go to receipt. So button, it's going to be go to receipt. Let's make this a nice little pink Page Designer. We're going to like that. Page Designer, save. And now, even if we're outside of this, we can say, okay, this current receipt is being worked on. We want to close it out, go to receipt, and it opens up Page Designer on the receipt that we're looking at, right? So that is exactly the receipt that we need. And so providing context onto, which receipt should we be opening, is as simple as that click because we've configured that button to do this action, right? So example could be you're looking at different projects. Instead of cycling through the different records, you just click on that button field, clicked on the right button to either get the receipt, get the meeting notes, get the deck, whatever it is that you need. You can quickly access it automatically. Then you could print this out, you can email it, do whatever you need to. Cool. So we are at use case number 4. We have one more, which is send an email. So again, I'm going to just take a quick break here. Let me know if there are any questions so far. So what we've done is open the URL to ShareGrid to search for a specific camera, specific model. We created 2 different webhooks. That was one use case, but I kind of called it 2 from Zapier to be able to create, open a receipt and add an item to a receipt. And then finally, we actually printed out that receipt using the button field integration with Page Designer. Whew, a lot in 30 minutes. Okay, let's go into sending an email. So I think I have this in Project Tracker. Nope. All right, let me find where I created that. Let me hide my screen for a second. Okay, here we go. Okay, I got it. Let me go back to mainstream. Okay, huge thanks to FinSuite for that little thing that jumps around whenever I'm hiding my screen. Appreciate it. Okay, so I have a very, very simple project tracker. I have 3 tasks in my tasks, if you will. Different statuses, a due date, and then a very simple formula that says if today is past the due date, say past due, that means the task is late. And if it's not past due, we still have time to complete that task. Say output we good, right? So past due we good, and essentially a lot of folks create an automation that when a task is past due, they automatically send an email saying, hey, the task is late. And I find that a little aggressive, right? Maybe I'm 1 day late. It's not the end of the world. And so, personally, I'm more of a fan of manual triggers, manual reminders. And also why I'm not a fan of, this past due is that once you trigger that reminder in Zapier, you can only do it once for that specific record, right? So if you have a view that is your task is late, it'll only trigger once. And if you want to trigger after 2 days, after 4 days, after 6 days, well, you have to create fields for each one of those triggers and views for each one of those triggers. It's a little bit of a pain. So I'm more of a fan of manual reminders. And as someone who's always late on their tasks, I do appreciate, a gentle manual reminder. So what we want to do is we'll create that reminder. So let's go ahead and say send reminder email. And we're going to use a button field. So button field, our label is going to be send a reminder. Always pink, maybe aggressive red. Maybe that's better, solid red. And what we're going to do is send an email with SendGrid, right? So I already set this up, but mainly because I didn't want to pull up my API key on the stream, but I'm going to go to dashboard 1. We're going to use SendGrid and save that. And so SendGrid is going to send that email for us. And so let's just configure this email to send what we want it to send. So your task is late. Say your hello, your task was due on due date, and it is now past due date. Please go finish your tasks. And then something you can do is just actually take the view like that and just paste it in, because that view is not going to change. See them here. Let's preview that. So it's going to send out. Now it's assuming that it's going to send it out to everybody in the view. And that is how SendGrid operates in Airtable as a standalone block. So you select, if I go back, it's sending the table tasks. It's going to the grid view. It's looking at the collaborator and then sending this email. So what it's telling us is going to send to all three of these tasks, whether it's past due or not, it doesn't care because it looks at the whole view. Now, if I click on send a reminder, it's going to provide context to SendGrid as to which person, which task I want to send this email for. So it's like, hello, your task was due on July 5th, right there, and is now past due. Please go finish your task, and then, click that link. So this is a manual reminder, and if I, take it for another one, well, actually that one's not past due, so we shouldn't be able to send a reminder. So what I'm actually going to go do is create a past due view, and we're going to filter where past due contains past, like that. And so go to grid view, let's move this one back. Let's say this one's also past due. Come back to my past due I2. I have two reminders I could send. If I change it to this one, it now updates. Let me go back, back like that. Let me get out of my dashboard, send a reminder, and it contextualizes the reminder I want to send. And I could just click send, and it'll send that reminder to that specific collaborator. If you have external collaborators, you can do this as well. Let's say you have a tab that is, freelancers, and you assign them to a specific task, and you pull up their email in tasks. You can also include that email into the to field. I have the collaborator field. That one has an email, but you can have an email field as well. Okay, that was 35 minutes, 5 things you can do with the Airtable. So let me just go back into our checklist. 1 second here. Okay. All right, camera. There we go. All right, we can check off send an email. And so essentially what I want to end with is that there are a lot of other things you can do in the button field, right? So I showed you a few examples, but you have run script, preview URL. So those are for specific links like YouTube and Spotify, where you can actually click that link in the preview URL. Form stack for creating more robust contracts and things like that. So if you have all of your sales information in a record, you could create a document with form stack that will automatically send potentially. And then attach stock photos with Pexels. Pexels is a stock photography website, so you can do that as well. And finally, you can open a custom block. So if you've built your own block that requires information from a record, you could also specify an action with a button. So take context from that record, be sent to your custom block. And I'm really, really excited to see what people will do with custom blocks and the button field together. Cool. So 36 minutes in now. I'm actually just going to get myself a glass of water. Let me know if you have any questions before we sign off. I'm going to stay for maybe 5 more minutes, just answer any questions in the chat. So let me know. I'm just going to get some glass of water. I'll be right back. All right. So I'm not sure. All right. So thank you, Colleen, for joining. Really appreciate you showing up. right. I'm going to assume I was either very confusing or very clear because there are no questions in the chat. All right. Well, Joe, it's good for you to join. I'm excited to see what you build with custom blocks as well. All right, cool. So I'm gonna let you go. I'll be back in a couple of weeks. Yeah, really a pleasure to do this all the time. Really excited to see what you build with Buttonfield. You can always reach out to me with examples at Aronkor, Aronkor on Twitter. Really appreciate everyone joining, and really excited to see you all again in a couple of weeks. Bye, everyone.